I don't know why these things happen around 2 o'clock in the morning, but there is just something about teenagers and 2 o'clock in the morning. But anyway, Barry and I were sound asleep, and all of a sudden I heard this crash, crash, bang, 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 bang. And I bolted upright out of bed and I ran to the other side of the house. And there was my son, Ben, lying in the bathroom floor. His face and his arms were bleeding. The shower curtain was off the rod and torn in shreds, and the parental question formed on my lips. What on earth? Well, the story began to unfold. He said earlier in the day, someone had told him that he would look really great if he bleached his hair. His very dark brown, almost black hair. So apparently on his way home that evening, he had stopped at Walgreens and gotten some Miss Clairol. And he had spread out all of this stuff on our kitchen table, and he had on the little plastic gloves and was proceeding to, well, to be perfectly honest, it looks like his head had encountered Jackson Pollock's paintings. But anyway, he was going to bleach his hair. And he said, I was in the middle of fixing my hair, and all of a sudden, Bosco jumped up on the table. Bosco was our black cat, our solid black cat. He said, I was afraid the chemicals would hurt him, so I picked him up to take him off the table, and everywhere I touched him, he turned white. So I thought I'd put him in the shower. I looked at my son's bleeding arms. I looked at the torn shower curtain. I looked at our now black and white polka-dotted cat. And Ben said, it did not go well. This is the picture I saw. And this is the voice that I heard when I read the scriptures for today. And I got to that place in both the Old Testament and the New Testament text where it says, in the wilderness there is a voice crying. And I thought, it did not go well. Now, there are so many ways to find yourself in a wilderness. For months now, I have been wandering around in a wilderness of my own grief over Ben's death. And it's a lonely place. As much as people reach out to express their love and their care, no one can ever really say, I know exactly what you're going through. And from that wilderness place, sometimes I call out to God. And other times I just cry out to no one in particular. And at times, all I can do is cling to the promise that I do not have to stay in the wilderness forever. Years ago, I remember having a conversation with Father Strobel, the priest who started the Room in the Inn program in Nashville after the murder of his sister. And he said to me, I've come to believe that about 90% of all of the homeless that I encounter are homeless because of some deep grief or loss. The death of a loved one, the loss of a job, the loss of a marriage or a family, the loss of control through addiction. It's all a kind of deep grief, and it has a way of leaving folks stranded in the bleakness of wilderness, lonely places. Places where there is not much to sustain you, dried up and thirsty places. Oscar Wilde sort of captured it, I think, when he wrote, "My heart is in some famine-murdered place. All good things have perished utterly." It did not go well. Isaiah's message in our Old Testament text today comes to a people living in an exile-weary wilderness. For 70 years, they had lived under oppression that culminated in the destruction of their beloved Jerusalem. It had not gone well. But it was expressly into this kind of place, the place where the grass withers and the flower fade, and the place where all people are nothing but grass. It is here. It is expressly in this place that the good news of God breaks in. Comfort. Oh, comfort my people, speak tenderly to her, and cry to her that she has served her term. The penalty is paid. See, the Lord is coming in strength. The Lord will come like a shepherd, feeding the flock, gathering the lambs into his arms, carrying them close to his heart. Now, I dare say that there are not many in this room today who have ever cared for sheep, nor have you known a shepherd up close and personal. But it's interesting to me how the image is still so compelling. Even here in this 21st century postmodern world, the 23rd Psalm is the scripture most often read at the bedside of the sick. It is the scripture most often read in the company of those who are grieving the loss of someone in death. How many times have you gathered in a place where the song of the gathering has been, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all of my days, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Why do you suppose that such an image still has power to console us even today? It's the sheep. It's the creature within us that is aching, that longs for care, that wants desperately for someone to soothe our fears and give us warmth and security and affection. I don't know how many times, jokingly, people have asked me this past week, well, last week you had a live potter here in the chancel. Are we going to have live sheep this week? Well, the answer to that question is yes. If you truly read the biblical narrative, this room is filled with sheep. All you've got to do is look in a mirror or look at your neighbor. Go ahead and get it out of your system. Okay. All of us at times are sheep. All of us at times feel like frightened animals. All of us at times feel pain and even despair. And for whatever reason, you can fill in the blank, it did not go well. And we look up and we find ourselves in some famine-murdered land. And how we long for a shepherd to care for us. And as Dennis said, to lead us home. And in this season, this is just the one that we say we are preparing to receive. We are preparing our hearts and our lives to receive the Good Shepherd. And what is this shepherd like? In her little book, Prayer, Stress, and Our Inner Wounds, Flora Woolner tells of a particularly compelling image of a shepherd that had stayed with her since childhood. It was a painting hanging on the wall in her Sunday school class as a child, but it wasn't that familiar painting of a nice young man robed and peacefully carrying a little lamb in his arms. Rather, it was a man who was tattered and bleeding, who had crawled down a very steep cliff edge to rescue a lamb that had fallen. You could tell that the lamb had been injured because up in the sky there was a bird of prey circling. And Woolner writes, I could not see the shepherd's face as he strained down to the sheep, but I could see the knotted muscles, the bleeding hands and arms gashed by thorns, the twisted garment torn in the deep descent. The Good Shepherd that we prepare a place for in this season affirms that he is willing to lay down his life for the sheep. Because the sheep are his, and he cares for them, and he loves them. He would die for them. He did die for them. He does die for them. I'm reminded of the story of the little girl who was memorizing the 23rd Psalm for her Sunday school class presentation. And she stood before the congregation, cleared her throat, and said, "The Lord is my shepherd." And then there was nothing except a little bit of hand wringing. So she started again, "The Lord is my shepherd." But all that followed was a little bit of shoe shuffling. So yet again she began, "The Lord is my shepherd, and that's all I need to know." And there's something to be said for that affirmation. Almost. Because our gospel story does not end with the coming of the shepherd. In John's gospel, it ends on a beach on the Sea of Galilee. Peter has pretty much declared it did not go well. The whole discipleship thing had gotten lost in a cloud of misunderstanding. The whole "I will follow you even into the jaws of death" itself got swallowed up in the sound of a rooster's crow. It did not go well. So here is Peter in this famine-murdered land, standing hope against hope, face to face with the risen Christ. And what does Jesus, the beloved shepherd, say? "Peter, do you love me?" Not once, but 3 times he asks it. "Peter, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And then in my imagination, I see Jesus stretching out his hands to Peter and saying to him, "And feed my lambs, tend my flock, feed my sheep." The good news of the gospel is this: we prepare the way for the coming of the shepherd who will rescue us and care for us, feed us, love us, and yes, lay down his life for us. But then he turns to look us in the eye. And then he hands over to us his rod and his staff. And he says, "As I have been your shepherd, now turn to each other. Shepherd one another with the tenderness and the strength and the love you have known. Carry the lambs in your arms and hold them close to your heart and bring them home. It is only then that our hearts can share in the affirmation of Julian of Norwich. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well."